Blender for Noobs.
Hello, this is Dan Nobles and welcome to Blender for Noobs, and welcome to this lesson on how to model a technical drawing. And if you're following along with the course, this is lesson 5 of Blender 3D Modeling for Beginners. In this lesson, we're going to model a fairly simple technical drawing, and we're going to do so that we can create an exploded view of this part that we're going to be modeling. And in the process, we're going to cover a number of important concepts in Blender. We are not going to get into tolerances or exact measurements of the part, but what we're going for is creating the technical drawing itself. So let's go ahead and get started. So for this lesson, we're going to be using 3 windows. So if you have your 2 windows here, I'm just going to go over here and move this window over a little bit. And then go up to the top, and I'm just going to drag this down so it creates another window. And we're going to be using some background images in order to create this part. So on this main window here, we're going to use this as our side. So if you choose 3 on the numpad, you get your right view. Then you want to choose N on your keyboard. This brings up this menu here. And in this menu, we can select our background images. So if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see this setting right here, background images. Go ahead and check that, expand it, and we want to choose add image. And for the type of view, we want the right view, so we're going to choose right. And then we want to open our reference image. Now these reference images are attached to this course, so you just need to download those attachments, and wherever you save these images is where you're going to open them up at. So once you find your images, for the right view, I'm just going to choose a cylinder underscore side. And you should see a image in the background there. If you don't see the image, you may not be in your right ortho view. So you want to make sure that you choose 3 for your right view. Also choose 5 for ortho. You can toggle between ortho and perspective, and we want right ortho. So now we need to put our front image in here. We can go ahead and choose N. And again, you want to scroll down to where you see your background images. Check that. Expand your menu. Choose Add Image. And for this one, we want to choose Front. And choose Open. Find your reference images and choose cylinder underscore front. And we'll open that image. And you should see your image there as well. And if you don't see it in the front view, you need to choose 1. And again, make sure that's ortho view. Now, when you're working with background images, say we were making a car or something like that, you would have these front, side, top view images of a car. And then you would actually want some reference images that show the real world object that you're modeling from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this window over here to view our image of this, what I'm going to call is a cylinder. I just made this piece up just so we could do this lesson. But if we come over here and choose UV Image Editor, and I'm going to choose Image, Open Image, and go back to our reference images, and I'm going to choose cylinder underscore perspective. And this will give us kind of a reference view, because sometimes your front, back, top views don't show all the details that you need. So especially if you're modeling something like a car or something more detailed, you want to get as many reference images as you can, showing all different sides that is going to have modeling detail to it. Okay, now the other thing that you need to know or need to be concerned with when you're working with background images is when we're working in the 3D modeling world, whatever you're modeling here has to match exactly on all planes. In other words, if we look at the right view or side view, this image should be the same size as your front view. And that's definitely not always the case. So an easy way to make sure these images are the same relative size is we're going to go ahead and create an object. We're going to use as reference. So I'm going to choose Shift A. I'm going to choose Mesh Cube. And we're just going to size this to the basic outline size of this object. In this case, we only need to worry about the front view. So All I need to do in this case is just come over here. I'm going to choose Z so I can go into wireframe and so I can see through it. So I'm just going to scale this cube so it matches this, what I'm going to call the cylinder block here. So I'm just going to choose S to scale, correct scale here. And then SY, we don't really need to scale along the Y because we don't have a top view or anything like that. So we know as far as this image is concerned, and using this cube as a reference, this cylinder block is about this big. So now if we go over to the front view, you can see that it's not matching at all. So the way to fix this is we're going to scroll down on our properties here, find the images. And if you look down at the bottom here, you can see where you can size the image. So I'm just going to just scroll this down a little bit. And again, I need to choose Z up here so I can see. And I'm just using the mouse wheel to zoom in. So we need to scale this up a little bit. So it's pretty close, but it could probably come down a little bit. So in order to go along the X and Y, this is X over here and Y over here. So if we move our arrow down here a little bit, you can see that it's going to move the image, and that's going a little bit too far. So I'm going to say negative 0.05. It's a little bit closer, but maybe too much. Negative 0.25. Whoop. Negative 0.025. Okay, so that's closer, but then we need to size it a little bit here. Maybe 1.6, 1.65. Okay, so that's pretty close as far as the height of this cylinder block. And I may want to move it along the X just to make sure it's centered along the X there. So it's a little bit too much, so we'll go again at 0.05, and that looks pretty good. So that's just very basically lining up these background images. I have a whole tutorial on how to do background images, but this will work for our simple cylinder model. So now I can choose N to get rid of these menus. And I'm going to go ahead and delete this cube that I created here. X delete. And I'm going to choose Z to get back into solid view here, and Z to get back into solid view here. So before we do anything else, let's go ahead and save our file. So I'm going to do a file, save as, and I'm just going to call this cylinder. Save as Blender file. Okay, so now that we got our references, our background images set up, we can go ahead and start with our modeling process. So I'm going to start with this blue cylinder here. So I'm going to choose Shift A, go into Mesh, and as you might guess, I'm going to choose a cylinder. So there's my cylinder. I need to rotate it along the X. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. So I'm going to choose RX 90 on the keyboard and enter. And that will rotate it 90 degrees around the X. And I need to size or scale it to the size of the cylinder in our reference image. So I'm just going to choose S to scale it down. And now in this case, I can go ahead and choose Z, wireframe mode, and Z over here. It might be a little bit easier to see our reference image that way. And just scale it down some more until it fits your reference image. Now, my reference image is a little bit off, but it doesn't matter because I know I'm creating this object directly in the center because my red and white 3D cursor is right there in the center. So 3 side view, and that's where I want it. So I'm going to go ahead and scale along the Y. So you choose S, Y, and just drag my mouse over and that scales it out. And I'm going to scale it to about right there. And my reference image isn't exactly equal. So what I'm going to do is tab into edit mode. And I'm just going to select one of these vertices and B box select all of them. And I'm just going to move it over so it fits the reference image. Okay, A to deselect that. So we have our basic cylinder here, but if we look at our drawing, we notice also it has sort of like this white band in it. So In order to get that, we can do a Control R to create an edge loop, select it, and then you can move it. Just move it over to the first one there. Do another Control R, select it, and then you can move it over to the end where the other one ends there. And then if we look at our reference image, if we can zoom in, it's kind of hard to see here, but that white band is actually indented a little bit, as you can see from the picture here. So in order to mimic that, I'm going to choose Faces. And this is just an easy way to select that area. I'm going to choose Alt and just select one of these lines here, and that will select all the faces around the cylinder like so. So 3 side view. Now we need to scale this down, but we don't want to scale along the Y, because if we did, if I just chose S to scale and just started scaling, you'll see that it's going to scale down. So first we need to do an extrusion. So I'm going to choose E to extrude, and I'm just going to select off of that. And now if we scale down, you can see that it's going to scale along all the axes, which is not what we want. We want to scale along the Z and X, but not the Y. So in order to do that, I'm going to go back into 3 side view, choose S and choose Shift Y, which will keep it from scaling along the Y, and then we can scale down. And probably an easier way to see that is if I choose it here and I choose S Shift Y, you can see that it's only scaling along the Z and X there. Okay, 3 side view. And I'm not going to worry about putting the materials on yet. We'll do that towards the end. But if I tab back in object mode, and if I choose Z, you can see that we have our cylinder created. So 3 side view. Now before going any further, let's go ahead and name our parts. So if you look over to the right and see your menu here, you'll see this little menu up top, and this is called the outliner. In fact, if you chose this here, you can see it. If we come down here, you'll see it right there. The outliner is a way that you can name your different objects that you're creating. And I'm just going to move this menu down a little bit so we can see it. It's also a way that you can choose to hide objects. You can turn off the selection. So if I turn that off for the cylinder, I can no longer select it. That's helpful if you're working in a detailed area and there's a lot of pieces and something keeps getting selected and you want to turn that selection off. So then you can go ahead and turn it back on. You can also hide things from render. So if I rendered right now, I would see the cylinder. I'll just do a F12 real quick. So there's the cylinder. And if I turn off the render here, of course, when we render, it's hidden from view. And that's helpful if you're rendering something and you want to see what your scene looks like if one of the objects is not there. So for example, if you had like a mountain and a tree or something and you wanted to see how it looked without the tree there, then you could turn off that render. So I'm going to turn that back on. So these are our objects here. I'm going to go ahead and leave this object named cylinder, but as we move along, I'm going to name these pieces differently. In this case, this is actually a cylinder. The same thing as its primitive object, so I'm just going to leave it named cylinder, but we're going to work with this. And the reason that you use the outliner and rename your objects is you want to make sure that your objects are named in a logical manner. That way, if you ever sell your 3D modeling, or you are doing this for a customer, or if you even share it with somebody who is also into 3D modeling, especially when you get a model that's more detailed than this and has many objects, when somebody needs to go in and they say, oh, I want to select this nut here, then they can just look through the outliner and say, oh, okay, there it is. And you can select the various pieces that you need. It's just a very good modeling practice to have. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to create are these rods. So as you can see, that's also a cylindrical object. So I'm just going to choose Shift A, go to Mesh, and choose Cylinder. And we need to rotate this one as well. So RX90, Enter, rotate it 90 degrees. And then we need to scale it down to the size of this rod. So I'm just going to choose Scale, scale it down, way down, and then I'm going to bring it up. Zoom in so I can see what I'm doing. Scale this down and bring it up a little bit. And then I can also, over in this view, in the front view, I can move it over to where it actually is, zoom in, so I can see the, more the exact size of what this needs to be. And that's the reason you have these different views, is because some views are easier to see the detail than others, so you can model it correctly. So I'm just going to choose S to scale this up, and let's move it around a little bit. So about right there is where it's at. And now I just need to scale it along the Y, so SY. And I'm going to scale it about right there. And again, this piece back here is a little bit too far out, so I'm going to tab into edit mode. Choose this face here, and I'm just going to move it right to where it needs to be. And then again, we can choose Z to maybe see a little bit better when we're looking at our reference, our background images. So one thing you'll notice also about this, the rod, is it's got these threads, and you can kind of see them here. I mean, they're not very detailed, but if you want to, we can go ahead and add the threads. So in order to do that, I'm going to choose Control R, put an edge loop on this rod, and I'm just going to click on it and move it over. And we'll start the threads about right here. So I'm just going to move over, zoom in. Okay, so we're going to add some threads here, and we're not going to add true threads, but we're going to add some threads just so we give the appearance of threads. So in order to do that, I'm going to add some edge loops in here. So I'm going to do a Control R. And while I have that there, I'm just going to mouse up on my mouse wheel. And when I do that, it's going to create several edge loops. And I'm just going to keep going until they're about the size of the distance between those thread lines there. So I'm just going to click off of it and click off of it again. Okay, so now we have some edge loops that we can work with in order to create these threads. And what I'm going to do is choose vertex view here. And let's just go ahead and zoom in a little bit more so we can see what we're doing. And what we need to do basically to kind of mimic threads here is we need to scale these inward every other one. So in order to do that, we need to select them. And in order to select these, I'm just going to choose Alt and then select on the mouse right there. And then to select another one, I'm going to choose Shift, Alt, and select. And I'm just selecting between two vertices here. Shift, Alt, select. And that should do it. So now what we need to do, we need to scale these down, but we don't want to scale along the Y, because if I just chose S to scale, you can see that it's going to kind of get distorted. So again, we're going to do a S, and we're going to Shift Y to exclude the Y scale in this instance, and just scale down a little bit like so. And if I choose A and deselect all, then now you can see, let's go ahead and choose Z to get back into our solid view. You can see kind of we've mimicked some threads here. They're, like I say, not perfect threads, but from a distance, you can see how that they can mimic some threads. In fact, we probably need to add a few more here, which I missed. So 3 side view. And I'm just going to choose Alt select there and Shift Alt select here. S to scale down, Shift Y. And just scale those down like so. Okay. So now we could go across and do the same thing to the other side, but there's a little bit easier way to do that. We're going to actually mirror this so that we don't have to worry about doing all that work for the other side. Now in this case, it's not a lot of work, but when you get into different detailed things, it's good to know how to mirror this. So I'm going to tab into edit mode again, and I'm going to choose Control R, and this creates an edge loop, and I'm just going to select it and move it kind of right where the center is. And I'm going to come over here, select one, and choose B, box select. Box select all these vertices here, choose X delete vertices. So now we only have half of this. So now I'm going to tab back in object mode because you need to work with modifiers while you're in object mode. Come over here to modifiers, choose add modifier, and we're going to add the mirror modifier. But we don't want to mirror along the X, we actually want to mirror along the Z. So I'm going to turn that off, turn on Z, and you can see as soon as we do that, we get that mirrored image over there. And let's go ahead and turn on clipping. What clipping does is if we tab into edit mode, clipping allows these two objects to actually connect together correctly. So for example, if I turn clipping off, you can see that I can actually pull these two objects apart. But if I turn it on, I can put them together and then let go. And once I try to pull them apart, they are clipped together. Okay, tab back in object mode. Now that this is mirrored and this is all we're really going to do with this rod as far as the mirroring, we can go ahead and apply this mirror. So I'm going to choose apply. That way when we tab into edit mode, you can see all the geometry is actually there. And now we can come over here and we need to adjust this a little bit. So I'm just going to choose B box select, all these vertices here, and just pull them back a little bit to fit where they're supposed to be. The other thing that we can do now that we've mirrored it, we don't really need this edge loop here. So I can choose Alt, select this edge loop. I'm just going to zoom out and make sure that's all I have selected. And choose X and come down here and we're going to delete edge loop. And that's just a little bit of extra geometry there that we don't need. So now we have the rod here, but we actually need 4 of them. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. We can tab in object mode, we can duplicate it here. And if we do that, we'll have 4 separate parts. Or if we tab in edit mode and we duplicate it within edit mode, then we'll only have 1 part. And in this case, I just want the rod, these 4 rods to be 1 part. So I'm going to duplicate this while in edit mode. So I'm going to choose A, select all, come over here to my front view so I can see that. And I'm going to choose Shift D, and that will allow me to duplicate this. I just selected off of it, and I'm just going to move it over here. And now that I have these two, I'm going to choose B box select this one, choose Shift D, select off of it, and move those down like so. So now I have the 4 rods. I can A, deselect all, tab back in object mode, and there is our 4 rods. And you'll see in a minute why I created this as all 1 part. So now that we have our rods, I'm going to come over here to our outliner and double click in here and just call this rods. Let's have a logical name there. So next we're going to create this block, or these blocks. So I'm going to choose 3 side view and go into my Z, A, deselect all that, so I can better see this block here. And of course it looks very much like a cube, so we know we need to make a cube. Shift A, mesh, cube, and with our cube we can move it over and just scale it down a little bit. And SY to scale along the Y. We can move it over. SY. So about that size, and you can see that it is fitting our front view like it should. So we're good there. But one thing that you'll notice about this block is it has like a bevel on the sides here. Now, I could try to use the bevel modifier, but what the bevel modifier is going to do is it's not only going to bevel these corner edges, but it's also going to bevel every other edge there. So what we're going to do, I'm going to choose Z, solid view, so I can see what I'm doing. And we'll create these bevels manually. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, choose R to create an edge loop, move the mouse wheel up once, and that'll give us 2 edge loops there. Select off of it, select off of it again, and we need to scale on the X, so SX, and I'm just going to move this out to where I believe the bevel is going to start, which is right there according to our reference picture. We're going to do the same thing along the horizontal here, so Control R, move the mouse wheel up once. That creates 2 edge loops there. Select off of it twice. And then we need to scale along the Z, so S, Z. And just need to move that up to where those other bevels start on the side there. So about right there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take these edge points and we're going to move them inward to create that bevel. And in order to do that, we could use edges, but in this case, I'm just going to choose vertex select so we can select these vertices. So right here in front view, we can choose B box select, making sure that we select both of those vertices there. B box select over here, same thing there. B box select and B box select. So now we have all 4 of our corners selected. All we need to do is just do an S scale and scale it in like so, so it's flat, and A deselect and tab into object mode, and you can see that we have our block there. So while we have it selected, I'm going to change from cube to block in the outliner. Let's call it block here. Okay, and then if I take this block and I move it out, you can see that if we put this together, if I go into 3 side view and I put it pretty much where it's supposed to be, we could kind of get away with this because the holes in the block are kind of assumed. But since we're going to do a little bit of an exploded view on this part, you're definitely going to need the holes to show up in there. So I'm going to show you how to do the holes for this. And here's where you'll see why I created these rods as all one part instead of separate rods. So I'm just going to move this out, and before I do anything here, I'm just going to do a Control S quick save again. Always good to save your work as you're going. So we're going to use another modifier in order to create these holes. It's called a Boolean modifier. So with your block selected, choose modifiers, go to add modifier, and find the Boolean modifier. Choose that. And you have some, when it comes up here, you have a few operations you can do. You have intersect, you have difference, and union. In this case, we're going to do difference, and we're going to do it by an object. And in this case, I want to do a difference of the rods. So I'm going to come down here, and you can see also, it's kind of nice that we've named our items so we can actually see what we're working with here. So I'm going to choose rods. And now, when I move this inward, like so, it's actually creating holes in this block. And in order to see that, we can go ahead and apply the modifier, bring our block back out, and you see that we've created holes, which is kind of nice. Next, we're going to make that big hole, so we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to choose Add Modifier while the block's selected, choose Boolean, and in this case, we're still going to use the difference, but we're going to, for object, we're going to choose the cylinder object. And just move that into place so that the cylinder goes completely through the block, and we're going to apply the modifier. When we do that, bring that back out, you can see that we have a hole in our block. So now our block is basically complete as far as we want to work with it. So I'm going to choose 3 side view, and I'm just going to move it into place. I'm going to Z wireframe so I can make sure I'm in the right area here. Okay. Now we have another block over here, but it's exactly the same as the other one. All we need to do is duplicate it. So I'm just going to choose Shift D to duplicate, select off of that, and just move it down to this end here, right about so. So choose Z, solid mode, or solid view, and then we can see that we've almost got it done. The only thing that we have left as far as parts are these nuts that fit onto the rods. But just to back up for a second, if I take this block and move it out, now hopefully you can see why I created these rods as all one piece. When I wanted to do the Boolean modifier, I wanted this to be one piece so I could select it in the Boolean modifier and make these holes all at once. Now I could have done them separately. I could have had separate parts and created the holes one by one. But what it would have done is it would have created a lot of extra geometry on the block itself. Because right now if we tab into edit mode and we look at the geometry, if we choose A, and let's just choose edges here so we can kind of see this. You can see how when we created those holes, it started to create some kind of interesting geometry. And if we did those one by one, it would have created more and more geometry. So as you work with Blender and you learn the different aspects of it and different things that you can do, you'll find that it's a good idea to think ahead, try to think what you're doing. For example, I created this block and I knew I could duplicate it, didn't have to do all the work of creating another block, that sort of thing. So I'm just going to choose Control Z to move this block back where it was there. And let's start to create these fastener nuts. So I'm going to choose A to deselect everything. And by the way, if you wanted to, if we chose the rods and you wanted them to actually be separate pieces, you can tab into edit mode and you can actually separate these pieces. In fact, that's a common thing that's done in modeling, is adding pieces to a part and separate them. So say if I wanted to separate this rod here, I just use B box select, so I would have it as a separate part, and I can choose P, separate by selection, and now that has been separated out of the main part there. So if I choose, tab back into object mode and tried to choose it, it's just going to choose that part. And if I choose the remaining parts, you can see the three parts are still grouped together as one part. Now when you break a part out like that, if we look at our outliner, you can see that it's just going to name it the .001 after the name. Conversely, if you wanted to add a part into a part group, say if I wanted to make sure all these rods are all together, we can make sure we choose the first rod and then shift select the other part that we want to add it to. And the reason I'm selecting this part last is because when I join these together, it's going to take on the name of the last one that I select. So in order to join these together, you do a Control J, and now they're all one piece, and you can see it's just called rods again. So when I tab into edit mode, they're all one part of the part. So I'm going to tab back into object mode. Let's go ahead and create these fasteners. So if we look in our front view and look at one of these nuts, you can think of, what kind of primitive object do we need to create in order to create this? Because it has 6 sides. Well, you can think, well, I could use a cube and I can add some edge loops and, just move them around so that it fits that way. But there's a little bit easier way to do it, and I'll show you how to do that. We're going to create a circle, so Shift A, go to Mesh, and create Circle. And this will create it right there. But before you do anything, before you move it, choose T on your menu to get to your tools here. And if you scroll down in this area, if you don't see this area, you might have a little plus mark you need to choose there. But it'll just show you the number of vertices that by default are included with a circle. In this case, there's 32. But we know this has 6 points, 6 sides. So we're going to change this to 6 and choose enter. And immediately you can see that your object's changed. And now once you're done with this part of it, we can bring this up. I'm going to T to get rid of that tool menu. And we need to rotate this by 90 along the X. So R90, enter. Okay, we know it's not going to be this big, so I'm just going to S scale it down a little bit and move it forward. Go into 3 side view. It's going to be about right here and then back about right there. But we can look at our front view and line it up even better along the X. So I'm going to move this over. S to scale it down and just move it along the axes here so that it lines up to the size of our reference image, about right there. So now I'm just going to zoom in here on the side view so I can see it. And while I'm thinking about it, just do a Control S quick save. So in order to create this part, I need to tab into edit mode. And while the entire piece is selected there, I'm going to choose E to extrude. Select off of that and just pull that extrusion out. So something like that. And while I have this front piece selected here, I'm going to choose E to extrude again, select off of it, and S to scale. And I'm just going to scale down a little bit, and I'm going to pull that out just to get that kind of bevel there. Same thing with this other side, but before I do that, let's go ahead and close in this here, this area here. So E extrude, S to scale, and then I need to merge all these vertices together. So I'm going to choose Alt M, merge at center, and that's the merge menu there. Okay, same thing with the other side. We're going to do the same operation. So I'm just going to Alt select around the back here so it gets all those back vertices. Choose E, select off of that, S to scale, scale it down, and we just need to pull it out like the other one was. And E, extrude, S to scale in, and Alt M to merge at center. And basically what we've done, if we tab back in object mode, we can see that we've created this nut. If we bring it out, and we've pretty much just closed it in. So while I have this piece here, I'm just going to change this primitive name from circle to nut. So we need to create the hole in this nut here, and I could use the rod, but say for example you were creating one of these and you didn't have this rod created or something like that, and you needed to put a hole in there. Well, I'll show you another way that you can do this. Do Shift A, and I'm just going to create under mesh, I'm going to create cylinder. Come out here, bring our cylinder out. Need to rotate it 90 degrees along the X, so RX 90, enter. Scale it down. And we need this to be the size of the hole in the nut, so I'm just going to bring it over here and take a look at it. Let's make sure I get it on the right one. Looks like it's probably over here. There we go. So zoom in here, scale it down a little bit, and let's say we wanted our hole to be about right there. So I'm just going to move this out, and we need it to be long enough to make sure that the hole goes all the way through. So I'm going to scale along the Y, SY. Okay. And I'm just going to rename this temp, because it's just like a temp dowel that we're going to use to create the hole. So I'm going to choose my nut here, go back to modifiers, add modifier, choose the Boolean modifier, and we're going to do the difference again. And on the object, we're going to choose, this time we're going to choose temp, because we're going to use our temporary object here. And just move it over that object like so. And choose apply. And I've noticed that it's done something very strange here. It is actually did a different operation. It's sort of merged these together, which is not what I wanted to do. And I think maybe the reason it did that is because the normals weren't facing correctly. So I'm going to tab back in object mode, choose Control Z several times just to get back to this point here. And with the object here, I'm going to tab into edit mode, choose A to select all. I'm going to choose Control N, which is the same thing if you come down to mesh here and look at your normals menu. Control N is recalculate outside. And what it's doing is it's making sure that these faces are pointing in the right direction. So Control N. And when you do that, you can kind of see a difference in the shading on it. So sometimes if you see, you're creating a part and you see that dark look on it and you're wondering why it looks that way, it's because the normals are pointing the wrong way. Another way to check your normals, if you choose N and we look at our menu here, we can come down to this area here that says normals, and you can show normals as far as the where they're coming out at the vertex or the face. So if I choose vertex, you can see that these little pointers are pointing outward, which they should be. If I choose this and I choose mesh, go to normals, and if I flip them, you'll see, well, it's kind of hard to see them now because they're pointing inward, but then you'll know they're not pointing correctly. You can barely see some of them there. So I'm just going to choose it again, Control N, and now they're pointing outward like they should be. Okay, choose N to get rid of that menu. All right, tab back into object mode and we'll try this again. Come over here and choose our temp object. And I'm just going to move this over like so. And it looks a lot better now. It's not creating a lot of interference pattern or whatever it was doing there. So I'm just going to move it over like so and apply and move it right back off, and you can see it created it correctly. So we don't need this temporary part anymore. It's served its purpose. So X delete, and I'm going to choose 3 side view. Then I'm going to choose this nut and bring it over to where it needs to be, right about there. Go to my front view, and I can do a Shift D, duplicate, bring it over like so. Shift select the one that we just had. Do a Shift D, duplicate, and bring these down like so. And we've just created our fastener nuts for this. Now, in this case, we could leave these separate objects like they are. But I know that what I want to do is be able to pull these out away from the object. So instead of pulling these individually, each one out away from the object, in this case, it's just going to make sense to make them one part. So I'm going to look at my parts here, and I can see this is the main one. So all I need to do is select this one, Shift select this one, Shift select this one, and Shift select this one, and come over, back over to my view here and do a Control J, and this will join these parts together. And now we just have the one part, and when I move them, I can move them all at once. It also makes it easier to duplicate these. So I'm going to choose 3 side view, Shift D to duplicate, and now all I need to do is just move those 4 over here. A to deselect off of it, and you can see our part is pretty much done as far as the modeling. So I'm going to choose a Control S quick save, enter. Now you can see, looking at this part, if we look at the cylinder, we can see that geometry there, which it needs to be smooth. So an easy way to fix that is select that part. I'm going to choose T from my tools menu, come over to the shading, and I'm going to choose smooth shading. And that's just an easy way to smooth out the more simple objects. And in fact, you can do the same thing for these rods here. Just smooth those out. And T, remove that menu. So all that's really left for us here on this is to give it some materials and take a render of it. Set up the lighting, take a render. So in order to get close to this look, we're not going to get this exact look, but just a very quick lighting and rendering. I'm going to choose the cylinder. I'm going to come over here to materials. I'm going to choose the plus mark, choose new, click on the material, and I'm just going to name this cylinder just to be consistent. I'm going to use the diffuse, but I'm going to change this to a different color. So I'm just going to make it somewhat blue, like so. And by the way, we're going to be doing, we're going to do a cycles render for this. So in order to use cycles, just very quickly, because I covered cycles in the last course, I'm going to go to File, User Preferences, and you want to look at the System tab, and then come over to this area here and look at the Compute device. If you have the CUDA, you'll want to check your card here, and that means that you have an NVIDIA card that will support this. If you do not have this, just leave it as it is, and we're going to save user settings and close this menu. And I'm going to change this over to the Cycles Render Engine, from Blender Render to Cycles Render. And while we're setting up cycles, I'm going to choose the render settings here, and you'll need to look at this device down here. Now, if you have the NVIDIA and CUDA support, you can change this to GPU compute. It will be a lot faster for you. If you do not have the NVIDIA card, you need to leave this at CPU. Okay, so we'll continue on with our materials. We'll get back into our render settings in a little bit here. So now, when we changed over to the cycles render, the materials will look a little bit different. And we want to choose Use Nodes. We're going to leave the surface as diffuse. Or if you want to play around a little bit, you can change it to glossy and see what some of these other settings do. I'm going to come over to this block, select the block, go to Materials, choose plus mark, do a new material, And I'm just going to double click in here and call this steel, just to get like a generic steel color or material. And in this case, for the color, I'm just going to make it kind of grayish. And if you want to see what these are looking at like, you can choose the preview. And as you can see, the steel material is very bland. It's using the diffuse. If we change it over to something like glossy, it might look a little bit better for you. You may want to play around with the roughness a little bit. We can choose 0.2 and maybe closer to something like that. But really, when you're working with materials within the Cycles render engine, it gets into creating nodes and using the node editor, and that is an entirely another course to learn all that. So we're just going to create some basic materials here, and I'm going to choose our nut pieces here. Go back to our materials, choose the plus mark, choose new, and I'm just going to name this steel 2. Just want to kind of differentiate them between the blocks there. So I think for this, I'm going to choose color, and I'm just going to make them a little bit darker than the other one. And I'm going to change it to glossy also. Definitely not that glossy. I'll say 0.1. Like so. And then I'm going to choose the rods and look at our materials here. In this case, I'm going to use the same material we use for these nuts. So I don't have to create a new one. I just can drop down this material here to browse. And I'm going to choose the steel 2, and that will apply it to the rods. Now we didn't do anything for this group over here, since this is a separate part group. So I'm just going to drop it down here and choose steel 2 for that as well. The only thing that we have left is there's sort of a white band here on this cylinder, so we need to change that. So if I select the cylinder, you can see we have the blue. So whenever you apply a material to a part that also has specific different materials, you always want to apply the base material first. It makes it a lot easier when you go and try to, for example, if I tried to apply this white one first, it would make the entire cylinder white. So you always want to make sure you do your base material first. So in order to do the white material here, I need to tab into edit mode. I'm going to choose faces, and I need to select this ring here. So I'm just going to do an alt select right on one of these edges of the face here, and it'll select that entire ring. Come over to our materials, and you can kind of think of this material as sort of like a subset of the other materials. In other words, we're tabbing into edit mode, and that's where we're putting this material. So I'm going to choose plus. I'm going to do a new material just like we did before. And I'm going to change this, double click on it, and I'm going to call it white. And for the color, it's already sort of white, but if we click on it, we can see we can make it brighter if we need to. And we probably also want this to be somewhat glossy, but not that glossy. I'm going to do a 0.3, maybe even a 0.5 there. And the important thing that you need to remember when you're creating materials within a part that already has materials is you need to assign the materials. Because if I just left it like this right now, it doesn't know that the white goes on these faces. So choose assign, and it's applied the material to those faces. Choose A, deselect, and tab back into object mode, and you can kind of see from the view now that it is white. Now that we've done all this work, I'm going to choose Control S Quick Save, and we need to be concerned with our lighting a little bit now. So just a very basic lighting setup. I'm going to choose Shift A, go to Mesh, create a plane, and I'm just going to S scale this plane out. And this is going to be sort of like our backdrop or floor for the part, because as you can see, there's some shadows showing up here, and it looks a lot better when you start to do a render of your part. So if I choose 3 side view, I can kind of see where the bottom of this is going to hit, about right there. And you can go ahead and you can add a material to this floor if you like. I'm just going to leave it as it is. I'm going to choose this point light here that I have, and I'm just going to X delete it. And I'm going to choose Shift A, go to Mesh, create a plane, bring this up. This is going to act as our lighting for this scene. So I'm going to scale it up a little bit, and then SY, scale along the Y. And let's just go ahead and give it a little bit of an angle like so. And I'm just going to G, move it over to the side like so. And while it's selected, I'm going to go ahead and rename this, and I'm going to call it lamp. And in fact, we can rename our plane here. Let's call this floor, or you can call it backdrop. Okay, and we're going to select our lamp again. And this is going to emit light, so it needs an emission material. So go to your materials. I'm going to choose plus, new. I'm going to rename it. I'm just going to call this lamp. And scroll down here, and instead of a diffuse surface, we're going to click on this diffuse, and we're going to change this to emission. And when you do that, it becomes an emission material, and you can change the strength of it here. Also, if you scale it, it tends to be a stronger light, of course, because it's covering more area. So the size of this panel, you can call it, or this lamp, along with the strength that you set it at here, is going to affect how bright it is in your scene. Okay, so that is our basic lighting. So let's go ahead and look at our render settings. I'm going to choose render here. And we also already have either our CPU here or GPU compute. You want to make sure that you got your resolution that you want here. And if you're using cycles, you'll see some new settings under here that's called sampling. So I'm just going to expand that out, and you'll have two main settings here under samples. The render number of samples is how many samples it will take to render if you hit F12. The preview is how many samples it will take if you're just previewing the window. So in other words, I'm just going to do a Control S, quick save, and come down here to the methods of different methods you can display. Choose this, and I'm going to choose rendered. And when I do that, you can see it's starting to render our object. And this is real time, so it's very nice to be able to see pretty much what your model is going to look like when you render it. So now I can bump this up to, if I click over here and say 100, you can see it counting up, and it's going to take 100 samples, so you can see it's a little bit more clear as far as the render. And I can even select our emission light here, and if I scale it up, you can see how this is going to affect the scenes, make it a lot brighter. Scale it back down. And also, as far as that emission, we can select our material here, and we can change this to 10, and you can see it gets quite bright there. So I'm going to leave this at about 2. So if we're kind of happy about the lighting situation and how it looks, we can go ahead and start to set up our render. So I'm going to come back over, I'm going to change back over to solid. You can go down here and change to solid, or you can choose Shift Z. That'll bring you back to solid view. And we're going to set up our render here. So in order to do that, I'm going to select the camera, come over to our window here, and we're going to change this to our 3D view and do a Control 0. So this will show us exactly what the camera is seeing. And as you can see, this light panel is in our way. So in order to fix that so it doesn't render in the camera, we're going to select our light panel and come over here to Object Data, scroll all the way down, and under Array Visibility, if we expand this section, then we can turn off camera, and when we render, it will not see that light panel. So right now we can do a quick render just to test and see if it looks how we want it to look. I'm going to do a Control S quick save, do a F12 render. And there's our render right now. Now it's only rendering at our 10 samples, how we had it set here for the render. So we may want to bump that up to something better like 300. It really depends on how much quality you want in your render. The other thing that we can do now before we take another render, I'm just going to escape out of this view. and go ahead and explode our part so we can get our exploded part look that we were going for. So I'm just going to choose these pieces here, bring them out, choose the block, bring it out. In fact, we may want to bring this out a little bit further so we can see all the pieces. Same thing over here. So now it makes sense that I made these two separate part groups, as well as this one here. Okay, so there we have kind of our exploded view. We can come back here to our camera view to make sure that we're getting all the pieces. Just so we can see a little bit better here, we can choose Z, wireframe view. Select the camera. I just selected outside here to select the camera, or you can select it over here. And I'm just going to G move it and do a GZZ to dolly out a little bit. So I'll make sure I get the full view here. And do a 12 render. So there's our final render. We have our cylinder exploded pretty much like we wanted to. And something to think about in Blender also, say if you were doing some kind of mechanical type of presentation, you can also set up different parts so that they move together. In other words, if you were to move a gear one way, it could cause the other gear to move the other way, and create an animation in that way if you were doing something technical in order to demonstrate something. So Blender has a lot of really good functionality that you can explore as far as working with it in different ways. But this particular part is just for the modeling process, so that's what we're concentrating on here. And as far as the modeling process, in the next tutorial, what we're going to look at is creating a model using the edge contour modeling method. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll catch you in the next video.